Hey, I'm Curlyfries, an indie game dev. Welcome to another mini development showcase where I show you my method of developing a game mechanic for my current project. Today's project is Project Eat the Rich, a sci-fi RPG third-person shooter where you play as Agent Mars, a super agent with super speed who defects to a small resistance group. Their objective: eliminate the top 0.1%. Society's wealthiest, members of an evil cabal that secretly run the world. It's an exciting project that I'll expand on in a later video, so if you're interested, patiently await the upcoming devlog. Recap time. Last video I successfully implemented the ability to equip, switch and drop guns, so it's obvious what I'm doing next. It's time to implement the key feature of every third-person shooter. Finally, it's time to give Mars the ability to fight back. But I should mention, Project Eat the Rich doesn't have a reload mechanic. What? Yep, Mars has super speed and I want to encourage the player to use it. Running around looking for a new gun during the heat of battle maintains that fast pace and high intensity I'm going for with this project. Don't worry, there are other mechanics like special abilities and melee combat, so the player isn't completely defenseless when unarmed. Without further ado, let's figure out how this should work. When the player holds down a button, they should switch to aiming mode. While aiming, when the player presses the fire button, the gun should fire a projectile towards the reticle's position. Whether the gun continues firing whilst the fire button is held down depends on the gun's type. Lastly, when the player releases the aim button, they should exit aiming mode. Okay, now I know how it works. Time to break it down. Into steps. What do I need to do? Step 1. Aim interaction. Detecting when the player holds down and releases the aim button. Step 2. Aim mode. Changing the FOV and displaying the gun reticle when aiming. Step 3. Aim movement. Ensuring the player faces forward while aiming. Step 4. Aim animations. Step 5. The Projectile Class. Creating a main projectile class that various projectiles can inherit. Step 6. Shooting. Firing the projectile at the correct destination. Step 7. Polish. Adding VFX and Recoil to make shooting feel and look good. I open my Eat the Rich Unity HDRP project and begin. Firstly, in the input action window, I create a new action for aim and define the input as the right mouse button and left trigger for console controllers. On the aim action, I add an interaction type of hold. Therefore, the player needs to hold one of these buttons for the action to be counted as performed. My project now implements a state pattern. So inside my player state machine script, which you can view as the player controller, I define an on-aim method to be called when the aim input is pressed. When the button is held down, is aim triggered is set to true and on release is set to false. I add this method as a listener to the player input on action triggered event. From the name, you can tell it's called when the player presses a button, hence why I added this line in on aim. Only execute the below logic if the input triggered is named aim. Whilst aiming, a different camera is going to be used to give an aiming perspective. Therefore, I duplicate my Cinemachine follow player virtual camera and rename it to be the aim camera. I alter settings such as the camera side, distance, shoulder offset and field of view. Next, I add a UI image as a child of the aim cam. This is going to be the reticle. I change the canvas scale mode to scale with screen size so the reticle is slightly bigger on bigger screens. I also adjust other settings. I create a new aim controller script which holds a reference to the aim camera and attach the script to the player. Now I begin the logic of switching to aim mode. Firstly, I define a method can switch to aim in the player base state, which is simply a class that all player states inherit. This method returns true if the aiming button is held and if the player is armed. Therefore, aiming is prohibited when the player is unarmed. Inside the player's default state, I define an aim method. Enables the aim controller script when aiming is allowed and disables it when aiming is prohibited. I refactored the logic into its shorthand version, then call it in the default state's update state. As a precaution, I disable the aim controller and exit state so that aiming is exited when the player leaves the default state. Back in the aim controller, I add multiple mono behavior methods. Firstly, awake, where I deactivate the script and aim camera just in case I forget to deactivate them in the editor. On enable, where the aim camera is activated. On disable, where the aim camera is deactivated. Lastly, update, where the reticle image is updated to the one set in the current gun's config. For viewers new to this series, the gun config was created in the last video. It's a scriptable object that holds various gun data like its reticle, which I've just set. It works, but the transition is incredibly slow and the reticle is ridiculously small. To fix the latter, I just increased the reticle's width and height. And for the former problem, I find the Cinemachine brain component on my main camera and reduce the default blend time from 2 to 0.25. To alter player movement while aiming, I must modify my move method in player default state. This is the current code. And this is the new code. When aiming, I set the player's rotation to be equal to the camera's rotation on the y-axis. That way, Mars is always facing where the camera is pointing. I've used map F smooth damp angle, which gradually changes Mars' current rotation y towards the camera's rotation y over a specified time. The purpose is to provide a smooth rotation animation rather than having Mars snap to desired rotation. I've moved target direction up so that the move direction can be set to a different value while aiming. That value is this, the input direction relative to Mars' forward direction. After some testing, I realized the camera sensitivity should be lower while aiming. Things like changing camera sensitivity and game difficulty are done in the game setting, which is handled by the game manager. So I introduced the game manager by adding its empty game object to the scene, then attaching its script. I convert it to a singleton because there's only one per scene, and as a bonus, classes can access its public methods without a reference. I define sensitivity variables for default and aim mode, then update my camera rotation method in player state machine. Camera rotation always multiplied by the default camera sensitivity, but the aim sensitivity depends on if we're aiming. So I add two parameters to the method. If not aiming, the arguments will both be 1, as multiplying a value by 1 returns the same value. Else, the arguments are the aim sensitivity set in the game manager, which the player can change in the game setting. It's animation time. I download numerous aim animations from Mixamo and bring them into my project. I update my animator to include an aiming state, which transitions between itself and default depending on the aiming ball's value. Inside the aiming state is a blend tree, and I've set the blend type to 2D simple directional. I create two new float parameters, velocity x and velocity z, and set them in player default state move method. Then add numerous blend tree animations which will play when velocity x and z are equal to their specified threshold. The animation looks alright, but Mars isn't aiming at the reticle. To solve that, I must install the animation rigging package. While attempting to use the package, I received errors. I realized my player's hierarchy setup was causing problems, so I restructured it by moving Mars rig to top level. The package requires that the character's rig be a direct child of the object with the animator. Now that the errors are fixed, I got Mars to aim at the reticle by following this perfect weapon aiming tutorial by CodeMonkey. Link is in the description. Now on to shooting, but first I create the projectile class and make it abstract, so methods with the abstract keyword must be overridden by derived classes. I define various variables with most required to be set by the gun that fired it via the setup method. In start, the projectile sets its rigid body velocity to its target direction multiplied by its speed. In update, if its distance traveled is greater than its max distance, it destroys itself. Though if it collides with anything while alive, it immediately freezes and calls an on-hit method, passing the collision data as an argument. On-hit is an abstract method that's overridden in the default projectile class, which simply instantiates a VFX at the first contact point then destroys itself. Later, more logic will be added, such as deducting enemy health. It's time to implement shooting. I began adding new methods to the gun class. Firstly, shoot. If it can fire and its ammo is greater than 0, it instantiates a new projectile at the shoot point with the shoot point's rotation. Then sets up the projectile by passing in an origin, destination, damage to deal, and max distance. Next, it reduces its ammo count by 1 and starts some coroutine. The first being the gun's fire rate routine, which sets campfire to false, then back to true after waiting the fire rate duration. Secondly, the muzzle flash routine, which activates the muzzle flash for a frame before deactivating it. I update my root gun prefab to include a muzzle flash and shoot point transform. This is applied to all prefab variants. In each variant, I move the shoot point to desired position and rotation. Back in the aim controller, I define the method to detect fire input from the player. If the button is held and the player is armed, it calls its own fire method. But if the current gun can be continuously fired, e.g. an assault rifle, this ball is set to true. Once the button is released, it's set to false and in on disable too, just in case the player is unexpectedly taken out of firing by getting stunned. On fire, subscribe to player imports on action triggered event in on enable and unsubscribed and on disable. Therefore, firing is only allowed when this script is enabled, basically while aiming. While developing aim controller's fire method, there was a problem with the reticle occasionally being inaccurate as the projectile hit a nearby object whilst traveling to its destination. The solution I designed is this: a new method, correct reticle pause, which predicts where the projectile is going to hit and moves the reticle to that position. This is achieved by raycasting from the camera's position in its forward direction, which goes through the screen center, the reticle user precision, and calculating the projectile direction. Then I raycast from the projectile origin in the calculated projectile direction and set the destination based on what this ray hits or doesn't hit. I convert the destination from world space to screen space and set the reticle position to that conversion. This method is called an update. Also, fire is called an update and continuous fire is triggered, and the fire method looks like this. If the current gun has ammo, it shoots it and passes the projectile destination. It works, but sometimes Mars is a bit of a numpty and accidentally shoots himself. This occurs because the player is pressing fire before Mars even raises the gun, therefore a delay is required. I create a coroutine which waits a specific amount of time before adding the on-fire event as a listener to the action triggered event. The time required for Mars to lift his gun depends on the duration of lifting his aim rig weight from 0 to 1. That duration is defined here, time delta time times aim weight change speed. Therefore, I use that same calculation as the delay time in the coroutine. To improve the gun's feel, I add some recoil by shaking the main camera. In the root gun prefab, I've created an empty recoil object with 3 children, each with their own Cinemachine impulse source component. The noise setting set in the raw signal field tells the camera how it should shake. X shakes the camera left and right, Y shakes it up and down, and lastly Z shakes it forward and back. For each gun, I establish different values for each recoil child by changing the amplitude, frequency, attack time, sustain time, and decay time. Inside the gun class shoot method, I call generate recoil, which loops through each child under the recoil header and calls generate impulse on their impulse source component. Beforehand, I randomize the X recoil's amplitude by flipping the sign of its current value. Next, I create a default projectile prefab and add a trail renderer component as a child. On the projectile itself, I add a particle system. To ensure the trail lives on when the projectile is destroyed, I set the trail's parent to be null inside on hit. For the muzzle flash VFX, I use the one from the Unity particle pack from the Unity asset store. I highly recommend that you download this asset to an empty project, as a lot of reviews have stated that this asset broke their project. The VFX doesn't look as good in my project as it's a HDRP project and the particles were made for URP. So I attempt to replicate the particle in a VFX graph using a muzzle flash texture I got from the Unity particle pack. I adjust the muzzle flash coroutine to use a specified duration because the frame was too short. Finally, the hit VFX, which I created by following this tutorial by Gabriel Aguiar Productions. However, the hit VFX is not shown as it's plain inside the hit object, therefore an offset is required. I add this to on hit. The hit VFX is now spawned at the contact point plus an offset, which is a point along the contact normal. I set hit offset to be 0.25 in the inspector. To avoid hierarchy clog, I create self-destruct script and attach it to the hit VFX so it destroys itself after a certain duration. After around 15 hours and 22 minutes of designing, developing, aiming and shooting, this is the result. Cool! And that's aiming and shooting. But there's still room for improvements, which I plan to implement in upcoming videos. Here's the list of planned features. Adding sound effects, object pulling. Rather than instantiating projectiles, I activate them from a pool to improve performance. Dynamic reticle, having it change color when hovering over an enemy and signify a headshot. Sniper mode, when aiming with a sniper it switches to a first person perspective with a scope overlay. Throw mode, when the current gun runs out of ammo, the player can throw it at an enemy's head to stun them. I believe I'll be implementing these 3 features after the next 4 or 5 videos. So on that note, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more. If you like what I'm doing here or have any questions, feedback, suggestions, make sure to join my Discord and I'll definitely get back to you. The link is here and in the description. You also get the chance to vote on what videos you want to see, project sneak peeks, and the chance to speak to me whenever you want. And finally, just to get you excited, here's a sneak peek of the next video. I'll be implementing shooting from cover. Alright. Take care of yourselves and have a super day. Curlyfries logging out.